Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where everyone is listening to this recording. Um, Happy to be here and working with y'all again. As a reminder, I am Sean Zimney. I am the one who led and supported a lot of this research with you all at the ELCA. This kind of was over the course of last summer slash last fall. So some of this might be repetitive for some folks, but this is just the purpose of this recording to synthesize and collect the data from the three surveys that we did conduct all into one recording here. So I'm going to have just a couple of quick reminders here and just an overview, including a quick recap, right? That there were three surveys, if you recall. So there was this initial survey that you all had constructed and then brought the data to me essentially, and we ran some analyses and looked at the data in various ways. That initial survey to ELCA folks went out to just under 1,400 individuals, or went out to more, but we garnered about 1,400 responses there. Then we identified that there was key reasons that we needed to expand in a couple of different surveys. So we had an ethnic association specific survey where we partnered with folks and we reached out to these ethnic associations to get a more diverse set of respondents. There were very limited engagement with that survey, 9 total responses there. Nonetheless, we have included those results in this survey, in these slides and in this recording. And then we also did a youth survey because we knew we needed that young audience. So we partnered with y'all and got a good amount of responses, just under 400. So 360, around 360 responses of people specifically under 25 years old from that conference, from that ELCA event. And so we ran a lot of different analyses. So we looked at basic demographic information. We looked at some core questions, of course, that you asked, both quantitative and qualitative data. And we looked at cross-tabulation. So we looked at how different demographics, whether people were white or BIPOC, or whether people were male or female or cisgender or non-cisgender, age differences. And we looked at how people responded to some key variables that way. So as part of this recording, I'm going to pair up, I'm going to show you the questions and the results from each survey, some key highlighted results anyhow from each survey, including the qualitative and cross-tabulation data. So we've got the ethnic association survey, the youth survey, and those initial results. So I'm going to skip over the demographic information for both the initial survey, for the ethnic association survey, and for the youth survey altogether, just because you can still see them. You can go reference them in the slides that are paired with this recording, with this presentation. But just as a reminder, that first initial survey, it skewed older, it skewed whiter, skewed more educated. It wasn't translated as a survey. So that actually, those results caused us to then specifically reach out to the ethnic associations and the youth survey. So the ethnic association survey, on the other hand, was more diverse, even with the very few number of responses. So even with that direct outreach, there was that limited engagement. Now, the youth survey, on the other hand, targeted younger folks at that event, like I referenced. It skewed younger, which is, of course, exactly what we wanted it to do. So that's obvious and a very good thing. Was, again, less diverse, though. So more white respondents proportionally. So you can look at the demographics. They look like this. You can look through the demographics like I referenced, but we're not going to go through them today. Instead, we're going to skip ahead to the core questions. And so the core questions that we asked in the initial survey were very similar. We're actually the exact same that we asked many of in the ethnic association survey. So there are the exact same questions that we asked in both surveys. The ethnic association had a couple of additional qualitative components and a couple quantitative components that I will get into as well. But so what I've done here, because of that, I've actually paired up the results so we can look at the proportional differences for each. So for example, here's what it's going to look like as we go through this. Here's a question from the initial survey, and then the very next slide are the results from that same question, but the ethnic associations survey. And as a reminder too, these were, again, questions that were compiled by you all, and then the data was delivered to me. And what the questions essentially revolve around is listing a bunch of different options. People could select as many as they wanted. The first question with those answer options, which you see at the bottom there, asked which of the following items of the congregation's purpose are vital to the ELCA's future. And then the very next question, as you'll see, asks which of these same exact elements need to be modified. So folks got the same list of both items. One asked which of these are essential to the ELCA's future, which of these should be modified. So there's some really interesting results. Sometimes they're coinciding, sometimes they're not. So what that tells us are very different things. Now, important to point out when they ask about modification, they're not actually saying exactly how these areas should be modified. Instead, they're just telling us that they should be modified. So a little bit area for further investigation there. However, let's get into this first set of questions. So again, comparing the initial survey and comparing the ethnic association results. So which of the following elements of the congregation's purpose are vital to the ELCA's future? So for this question in the initial survey, the last three were selected the least as being vital to the ELCA's future, and that is motivate its members to provide financial support for the congregation's ministry and the ministry of the synod and the church-wide organization. Number two, foster and participate in interdependent relationships with other congregations, the synod, and the church-wide organization. And three, foster and participate in ecumenical relationships consistent with church-wide policy. So in the initial survey results, those 1,300 or so respondents, people selected those last three as being least vital to the ELCA's future out of this list. Now compare that to the ethnic associations. Those last three were also selected the least, in addition to a couple of other areas different. So again, different number of responses. We're just looking at comparatively, proportionally, where did folks of each survey select items more or less than the initial survey. So higher in the ethnic associations was respond to human need, work for justice and peace, care for the sick and the suffering, and participate responsibly in society. So more folks in the ethnic association survey said that area, responding to human need, was vital to the ELCA's future than proportionally folks in the initial survey selected. But lower was the second option here, provide pastoral care and assist all members to participate in its ministry. Additionally, a little bit higher was challenge, equip, and support all members in carrying out their calling in their daily life and in their congregation. So that one, the challenge, equip, and support, as well as respond to human need, higher selected more as vital to the ELCA's future than participants in the initial survey, whereas provide pastoral care was selected less than folks in the initial survey. So let's move on to the next question, which was, which of these same exact elements of the congregation's purpose, instead of being vital to the future of the ELCA, need to be modified? So these, again, inversely from the first question, the last three were selected most for needing to be modified. So these same last three, motivate its members, foster and participate in interdependent relationships, and foster and participate in ecumenical relationships, which were selected least for being vital to the ELCA's future, were selected most for needing to be modified in the initial survey. Similar in way results in the ethnic association survey too. But so additionally, those last three were selected higher, but more people in the ethnic association selected motivate its members to provide financial support for the congregation's ministry and the ministry of the synod and the church-wide organization. More people in the ethnic associations selected that as needing to be modified than the initial survey, whereas less people in the ethnic association survey selected witness to the reconciling word of God in Christ, reaching out to all people. So less folks in the ethnic association actually selected that as needing to be modified than folks in the initial survey did. Additionally, which of the, going on to a new actual question set, which of the following elements of the synod's purpose are vital to the ELCA's future again? So you see four options here. This is the results from the initial survey. So provide for pastoral care of congregations and rostered ministers of the synod was selected most in the initial survey, whereas that final one, interpret the work of this church to congregations and the public on the territory of the synod, was selected least as being vital to the ELCA's future. Response is actually pretty similar here in the ethnic associations, with the first two in particular being selected most for the ethnic association. So providing for pastoral care and then plan for, facilitate, and nurture the mission of this church through congregations, while the same exact one was selected least as being vital to the ELCA's future. As the initial survey, that being interpret the work of this church to congregations and to the public on the territory of the synod. So similar results between the ethnic association and initial survey there. Now, which of these same elements of the synod's purpose needs to be modified? Kind of an inverse relationship here, right? So the first two being selected least as needing to be modified, and the last two as needing to be as being selected more as needing to be modified. So the areas that the initial survey folks said these are vital to the ELCA's future are the same areas they're saying selecting less as needing to be modified. So again, the last two selected more, fairly consistent there. But the ethnic associations, a little bit different results here as which of these areas needed to be modified. Obviously, higher and most selected among the ethnic associations was that second option there. Plan for, facilitate, and nurture the mission of this church through congregations. So folks from the ethnic association survey saying that area needs to be modified, whereas the others were not widely selected as widely selected by the ethnic association results. All right, a long list. You might have to zoom in a little bit on this one, but a long list here, again, for the initial survey, asked which of the following elements of the church-wide's purpose are vital to the ELCA's future. Just to give you kind of an overview, the highest here for the initial survey was 1, provide resources to equip members to worship, learn, service, and witness in their ministry and their daily life. 2, provide for the rostered ministries for this church. 3, provide pension and other benefit plans for this church. 4, witness to the word of God in Christ by united efforts in proclaiming the gospel, responding to human need, caring for the sick and suffering, working for justice and peace, and providing guidance to members on social matters. And then finally, the 5th highest option on this list that was selected, provide and monitor a system of discipline, appeals, and adjudication. So these were the 5 areas that were selected most as being vital to the ELCA's future in that initial survey. Now, looking at the ethnic association survey, overall, the 2 highest options selected for the ethnic association survey in this same list was foster interdependent relationships among congregations, synods, and the church-wide organization to implement the mission of this whole church. And number 2, to provide for the rostered ministries of this church. So some comparative, again, just some proportional comparative differences here. Higher among the ethnic associations for being vital to the ELCA's future was foster interdependent relationships among congregations, synods, and the church-wide organization. So that was selected more comparatively among the ethnic association results, but lower were several that I want to list out here, and you can see them in the notes sections of the slides. So lower in the ethnic associations than the initial survey were overseeing established policy for this church's relationship to seminaries, colleges, universities, schools, and other education endeavors. 2, establish and reflect this church's ecumenical stance in its relationship to other churches. 3, determine and implement policy for this church's relationship to governments. 4, provide planned giving opportunities for the financial support of this church, its congregations, synods, agencies, and institutions through the establishment of a foundation. 5, provide pension and other benefits plans for this church. And then 6, finally, provide archives for the retention of its valuable records and coordinate archival activities. So those areas that I just mentioned were selected lower in the ethnic association survey results as being vital to the ELCA's future comparatively to the initial survey. All right, so same question set again, same option set, but which of these elements of the church-wide's purpose needs to be modified? So the same list that we just went over, but which should be modified? So for the initial survey, the items that were selected most as needing to be modified were 1, determine and implement policy for this church's relationship to governments, and 2, provide for the rostered ministers of this church. Selected the least, though, out of this list as being needing to be modified was 1, provide archives for the retention of its valuable records, 2, provide planned giving opportunities for the financial support of the church, its congregations, synods, agencies, and institutions through the establishment of a foundation, and then 3, undergird the worship life of this church as the word of God is preached and the sacraments are administered. So those 3 were selected the least as needing to be modified in the initial survey. Now, if we compare that to the ethnic association results, Which of the following elements of the church for its purpose should be modified? So higher among the ethnic associations, as again, they're saying these areas need to be modified. One, provide and monitor a system of discipline, appeals, and adjudication. And two, oversee and establish policy for this church's relationship to seminaries, colleges, universities, schools, and other education endeavors, and provide support as appropriate. So those two areas were selected higher among the ethnic association surveys as needed to be modified. Now, selected lower were several, though. Selected least compared to the initial survey, several of these areas. So, one, undergird the worship of this church as the word of God is preached and the sacraments are administered. Two, provide resources to equip members to worship, learn, serve, and witness in their ministry and daily life. Three, establish and reflect this church's ecumenical stance in its relationship to other churches. Four, determine and implement policy for this church's relationship to governments. Five, provide a comprehensive financial support system for this church's mission and for the administration. Six, provide planned giving opportunities for the financial support of this church. Seven, provide a church publishing house. In fact, no ethnic association respondents actually selected that answer. And then finally, establish and operate other programs and activities determined by this church. So those areas that I just mentioned were selected selected less proportionally in the ethnic association survey compared to the initial survey. All right, finally, we had one more quantitative option here in the initial survey. So we asked, we said, please rank your agreement with the following statement. And the statement that we asked them to rank their agreement with was the ELCA structure, congregation, synods, and churchwide helps to promote racial diversity. So we asked them to rank whether they strongly disagree, whether they're neutral, whether they agree or strongly agree. There was an option for don't know as well. So we quantitatively coded this question. So with strongly agree getting a score of 5, agree getting a score of 4, neutral getting a score of 3, disagree getting a score of 2, and strongly disagree getting a score of 1. The answers that said don't know got no numerical coding and were removed essentially from the quantitative element of the statistical element here. The reason for that is that a higher mean score, closer to a score of a 5, would mean that more people are proportionally agreeing with this statement. So you see that mean score here on the right side of the screen, a 2.78. That is a kind of middle of the ground, low mean score. What that means is that you have a lot of people in the middle, right? Saying, I don't really know if the ELCA's organizational structure does promote racial diversity. You have also a lot of people, the second most, disagreeing with that statement. Proportionally, if you combine the strongly disagree and agree, that would outweigh that there'd be more folks disagreeing than agree and strongly agree. So the key takeaway here, even from the initial survey that skewed whiter and more educated, and a little bit older, is that most people are disagreeing with this statement that the ELCA's organizational structure promotes racial diversity. Let's compare that to the ethnic association results. So even more pronounced in the same way with a very low mean score of 1.78, again, compared to 2.78 in the initial survey. Indicates clear room for improvement, right? That folks in the ethnic associations who responded to this survey are saying across the board, no one agreed with the statement that the ELCA's organizational structure does help to promote racial diversity. Everyone either was neutral or disagreed. So clearly an area to highlight as a clear room for improvement in these areas. Okay, so some just key overall highlights here from the initial survey as well. Specifically that ELCA, this is kind of just an overview. So there's summaries of essentially the earlier results. So you can take a look here, but these are the key areas where ELCA survey respondents, again, from the initial survey, generally believe that these key areas are the most vital to the ELCA's future. So this is essentially compiling all of that data from that survey. And really the survey from this actually and the ethnic associations, if you combine them, be very similar. That overall, these are the areas that are most vital to the ELCA's future. So these are the areas that were selected most across all of the questions we went over. So not divided by each question set that you had. The top 3 that are bolded, those were the highest, the most widely selected, and then you have 4 through 7 down here as well. So if you want to just skip over all those kind of big and bold charts that maybe are hard to read, this is an area to to maybe really hit on and to read. And you have another the areas that folks generally most believe need to be modified. Again, they're not saying exactly how these people believe they should be modified, just that they should be modified. But these are slides that really you want to hit home on probably the most. Again, you have the top three bolded with 4 through 6 also being included. So something to consider here as important slides. This is again that same question about the ELCA's organizational structure helps to promote racial diversity. This is just in a chart so you can actually see the frequencies and the general percentages for how many folks actually disagreed versus agreed. That got us to that mean score with the total amount of respondents there. So hopefully this is a little bit helpful. Again, comparatively, we have a couple of interesting comparisons coming up where we look at white versus BIPOC individuals, as well as cisgender versus non-cisgender individuals, how they responded to this. As a hint, we also asked the youth survey this question. The youth survey actually had the highest mean score, but we'll get to that in just a second. But let's look at some key differences, how folks responded to this question. So let's look on basis of race. So let's look at white versus BIPOC respondents in that survey. You can see that somewhat similar, but BIPOC individuals do disagree with this statement even more. So with a lower mean score of 2.60 compared to white respondents giving it a mean score of 2.79. So BIPOC individuals agreeing less or disagreeing more that the ELCA's organizational structure helps to promote racial diversity. And then let's look at one more key difference here, a key difference in terms of gender. So you see cisgender man, cisgender woman, and non-cisgender individuals. So cisgender men agreeing with the statement slightly more with a 2.95 mean score. Cisgender women about the same as you saw in the general results at 2.78. And then non-cisgender individuals disagreeing far more than cisgender individuals with a mean score of 2.24. So what does that mean? It's that generally across the board, right, people are saying that the ELCA's organizational structure does not help to promote racial diversity, but that's even more pronounced with non-cisgender and members of the BIPOC communities who responded to this survey are saying that more so, right, are identifying that that's an issue more for them. All right, we're going to get in some cross-tabulation results as well. So what do we mean by cross-tabulation? It's just a word that essentially we're looking at the most significant differences observed from the data based upon those different demographics. So the previous slide there, that was a cross-tabulation right there. That is a key cross-tabulation. That's a key difference. I just wanted to highlight a couple of more. So we're just looking at things like this in a similar way. So let's look at a couple differences here. Just to describe a couple, there's a key age difference in the data. So younger people that's specifically under 25 years old widely believe that the following two areas are less important to the ELCA's future than all other ages responded, all other ages believe. So number one being the ELCA motivating its members to provide financial support for the congregation's ministry and the ministry of the synod and the church-wide organization. And number two, supporting and establishing policy for the church's mission and coordinating planning and evaluation for that mission throughout the world, including participation with other churches. So younger folks widely in the initial survey said these two areas are less important for the ELCA's future. They widely stated that that was the case compared to older generations. One more age difference that I want to hit on is that far more than others, again, is that younger people, those under 25-year-old in the initial survey, believe that the ELCA should modify its approach around these three key areas. One, providing services of worship at which the word of God is preached and the sacraments are administered. Two, strengthening interdependent relationships among congregations, synods, and the church-wide organizations, and fostering relationships with agencies and institutions affiliated with or related to this church, as well as ecumenical partners. And three, interpreting the work of this church to congregations, to the public on the territory of the synod. So those three key areas, younger people more than other generations are saying that they believe that the ELCA should modify its approach around these key areas. Again, not showing us how they should be modified, just that they should be modified. Two more cross-tabulation differences that I want to highlight. One being a gender difference. So we did look at these gender-specific responses, right? And so a key observation overall was that non-cisgender members of the ELCA highlighted the most existing and examined areas, some highlighted that we looked at above previously of the church as being less vital to the ELCA's future, whereas non-cisgender members identified more areas of the church that needs to be modified. So interesting overall results, right? So let me say that again. Non-cisgender members in that initial survey highlighted most of those areas that we talked about in the survey as being less vital to the ELCA's future, whereas proportionally non-cisgender individuals also identified more of these areas as needing to be modified. So non-cisgender respondents in that initial survey, widely across the board, generally saying these things are less important to the future, but these things also need to be modified. So identifying more areas there. It's really unique, really interesting finding. A second gender difference is that non-cisgender respondents broadly identified the area being the church providing and monitoring a system of discipline, appeals, and adjudication as needing to be modified. So again, non-cisgender respondents saying that that area needs to be modified, that area being the church providing and monitoring a system of discipline, appeals, and adjudication. All right, now we're on to the qualitative data. Some more descriptive data, we asked folks to actually respond to a series of questions. We looked through all of those, and there were a lot of them, all of those qualitative responses, and we coded them and statistically coded them or qualitatively coded them and grouped them into key themes, and that's what you're going to see in the coming slides. All right. One qualitative question we asked was, how can the ELCA be better structured to support the three expressions of this church for the sake of the gospel of the world? Second, excuse me, and we had a lot of responses, like I mentioned, and the following here are kind of some key items from that qualitative data from this specific question. So one, being that respondents discussed how widely just discussed how the ELCA can really better support the expressions, right? So better support across the ELCA, though, across congregations, synods, across the church-wide organization. And so respondents mentioned that recognizing that metro and rural congregations have really distinct needs. And so a key suggestion that did come up included reducing the number of synods in places where the ELCA currently has a strong presence. Respondents also discussed issues around social justice and how this means different things to different people. And there seemed to be a lack of unification around key issues, issues like abortion rights and immigration. Additionally included were a lot of suggestions around changing the ELCA's name, actually, including as well as reducing synod oversight due to too much bureaucracy, or waking up to see and learn from what non-denominational churches are doing around these key areas as well. Additional suggestions included adding a fourth expression to individual members' responsibilities, having a grassroots approach to church rather than a top-down approach, and overall improving communication through more organized websites and structured information sharing between synods and churches. Finally, other areas covered in the responses to this question included strengthening the role of bishops, speaking more boldly about current and social and political issues, even though that there was this lack of alignment on what those stances should be taking. Widely, folks thought that there should be more bold stances taken. Also focusing on learning from and supporting local congregations and ministries rather than that top-down control. And then finally, allowing lay administration of communion. So those were key areas for this question in the qualitative responses. Now, a second qualitative question we asked was, describe a situation where the current structure or power configurations of the ELCA supported the flourishing of the gospel in your context. So there was a mix of positive examples as well as some criticism that were highlighted through this question. So one, respondents mentioned various ELCA programs and initiatives that have supported gospel flourishing. And some of these included the RIC, the Reconciling in Christ program, grants for congregational vitality and new ministries, disaster response efforts, advocacy on social issues, global mission partnerships, leadership development programs, youth gatherings, campus ministries, structural support during pastoral transitions, and development of worship resources. However, some respondents did say they felt disconnected from or even unsupported by the wider ELCA structure, and others criticized the ELCA as being either too liberal or too political in general. Finally, many respondents also highlighted the importance of more formalized and structured synod support and leadership from their bishops in supporting congregations and rostered ministers. Asked another similar question here to describe a situation where the current structure and power configurations of the ELCA inversely not flourished, but actually inhibited the flourishing of the gospel in your conduct. So the same question as before, but the reverse. What inhibited the flourishing? Several respondents describe situations in which bishops have abused their power or failed to properly investigate issues. So examples included a bishop asking for a pastor's resignation without a full investigation, or a bishop refusing to allow candidates to interview at desired congregations, and even bishops mishandling conflicts. Many respondents also expressed frustration with the candidacy process, citing issues like inconsistent requirements across synods or committees judging based on unfair criteria and barriers to people seeking specialized ministries as a first call. Another common theme that arose was that both church-wide statements and stances from synods on political and social issues often anger conservative members and drive people away from congregations. And respondents say that these statements can divide congregations and take focus away from the gospel. Multiple respondents also criticized the call process, describing it as cumbersome, antiquated, overly rigid, and not suited for the realities of church leadership today. And issues included long vacancies between pastors. Several respondents mentioned the lack of support and training and resources for small and rural congregations as an ongoing issue, especially as many of these congregations face declining membership and cannot actually afford full-time pastors. And then finally, to this question, some respondents expressed concern that requirements around sacraments and worship put unnecessary limitations on lay people's involvement and leadership. We also asked in the qualitative sections for folks to name one way that the ELCA's organizational structure could be changed to better promote racial diversity. Again, kind of as a response, as a follow-up to that quantitative question, where clearly this was an area that needed improvement. So respondents included responses here included a recommendation for synods to have the power to relocate congregations based on changing community demographic needs. Some actually asserted that churches exist within that established framework and need to be re-examined at the structural level, citing organizational change initiatives that are needed. And some say structure itself is not as important as resource allocation. There were calls for formal, actionable anti-racism efforts by synods. Some say that the ELCA coming up with more of a strong, clear positions on key areas would be important. There are proposals for a council of diverse people to assist ministry practices and initiatives featuring community social and justice areas. Some respondents made the observation that the most segregated, actually this is a quote, the most segregated hour is Sunday at 10 a.m. That was stated directly. So an example is offered of a diverse Methodist congregation established within a red-lined neighborhood. The respondent stated that racial diversity cannot be forced or legislated, rather that it has to grow out of love for God's people. A suggestion was also offered for required race-conscious trainings and conversations for congregations every few years. Preferably, these would be in-person events paid for by the ELCA, bringing clergy and laity together. Another recommendation offered was around more structure in protecting, supporting local leaders speaking against discrimination. Respondents expressed that most leadership positions at the synod level are occupied by pastors, and some actually questioned if all positions required pastoral skills or if leadership teams could be more diverse and interdependent. And this could really result in how the respondents stated it, could result in the ELCA missing out on gifts by these other types of professional folks with other types of professional experiences, as well as BIPOC leaders not rostered in the ELCA. Another suggestion, and finally here, offered was for establishing traveling pastors to educate others by rotating preaching while also holding education sessions, combining local congregation. So really looking at that rural approach, right? That was cited quite often of the lack of support or that declining membership in these rural, smaller areas, needing to need that sort of extra support for both things like training and diversity issues, but also just generalized structured support. Then we also asked a question just to essentially just share any additional feedback generally that you'd like to share with the committee. A lot of this was just repetitive of what was already stated in the qualitative findings that I already mentioned, but a lot of the feedback revolved around improving diversity and organizational structure. Again, mostly repetitive, but a range. You can look at the high level summary here in the slide notes. But really, this is mainly just repetitive information that we already garnered from the other questions, other qualitative questions in the initial survey. So that was all of the information in that initial survey. Now we're going to move to the Ethnic Association survey specific results. Not as many questions. We already covered a lot of the questions of the Ethnic Association survey, but there were a couple here. So one quantitative question that we did ask was, how accessible do you find the information in Spanish provided by the ELCA? Whether that be very accessible or not accessible at all, or nothing accessible. So we did the same thing. We quantitatively coded this from a scale of 1 to 5. So a higher mean score is that more people say that they find this information in Spanish accessible by the ELCA. However, if you look to the right there again, a mean score of 2.11, that is a low mean score. So more people are saying that they're not finding information in Spanish accessible provided by the ELCA. So clearly an area that folks want to see improved here in the ethnic associations. And as kind of a follow-up question here, we asked what type of ELCA information would you like to see translated into Spanish? And really the key takeaway here is that all of them, because all of these areas were selected widely among the Ethnic Association survey. So that included press releases, information from the National Assembly, scholarship opportunities, elections, leadership spaces in the church, and job opportunities. So all of the above. So if you think about back to the first question, that they're not finding a lot of accessible Spanish information provided by the ELCA, and that they want to see that in all of these spaces and more. We also asked some qualitative data in the Ethnic Association survey, and thanks to Roberto, who helped to translate these materials. So here's the first qualitative question. How can the ELCA be better structured to support the three expressions of this church in the world for the sake of the gospel? The main suggestions were around flexibility and process streamlining. So respondents emphasized the need to make policies more flexible and processes more streamlined. And there's a general call for a shift in focus from institutional policies to people and ministries. There was also a component of decentralization. So a recommendation here to decentralize power and open up the church to external solutions rather than relying solely on internal ones. And then supervision and vision alignment here as well. So the folks emphasized a need for better supervision of bishops and synods regarding their policies, missions, and visions. A second qualitative question in the Ethnic Association survey described a situation where the current structure and power configurations of the ELCA fostered the flourishing of the gospel in your context. So some positive examples that were cited were around innovative projects being number one, that some folks mentioned that outreach projects and support for the innovative projects have actually helped to foster the gospel's flourishing. And that number two, they did, however, note a lack of clarity in the relationship between that national church synod and congregations, indicating room for improvement there. And a third here, similarly, describe a situation where the current structure and power configurations of the ELCA inhibited the flourishing of the gospel in your context. There were a few key areas that were emphasized by the Ethnic Association respondents here. One being a rigid candidacy process. So that structured and inflexible candidacy process is really seen as a significant barrier among these groups of people. So particularly for those in marginalized and impoverished communities. Economic sustainability expectations as well. So the expectations for economic sustainability was criticized for not aligning with the realities of these communities. The predominance of English language within the church also were stated to marginalize non-English speaking synods, such as the Caribbean Synod in Puerto Rico. And then a lack of support for marginalized communities was cited generally as well. So there was a perceived lack of commitment to poor and marginalized communities from the ELCA. And this reflected, as they said, in the results here, in the closure of many churches and insufficient support for transitions. And there's another qualitative question mentioned, one way in which the organizational structure of the ELCA could be changed to better promote racial diversity. There were several proposed changes by the respondents here, by the Ethnic Association respondents. One, the creation of a Latino synod, more cultural sensitivity training and decisions regarding Latino communities should be discussed and proposed by Latino communities themselves. So including these individuals in the decision making. A flexible structure, so the adaptation of the ELCA structure to meet more regional objectives. Also, ethnic representation was talked about. So appointing, rather than just electing representatives from actual major ethnic groups, increased participation. So people talked about greater involvement needed of the ELCA in Puerto Rico with Spanish and engagement in local activities, that local activities being a key element there. And then youth leadership, so encouraging young leaders with fresh perspectives, which is a good lead into the youth-specific results that will be coming here in just a second. Finally, one more Ethnic Association-specific qualitative question, one result here. Share any additional comments you'd like to communicate to the committee. So really just the overall here is that the Ethnic Association respondents in this question cited overall a need for change, right? So this really strong sentiment that vital changes are necessary within the ELCA and that waiting for widespread approval is not always feasible or timely. So they mentioned urgency for change, right? Recognizing that some necessary changes may never occur if they rely solely on gaining favor from all members. So overall, for the Ethnic Association results, saying that there's a strong sentiment that these changes are vital that need to happen, as well as that they need to happen more quickly. Finally, the last section here on youth survey specific results. Again, that survey that we sent to the ELCA conference, that event that focused on members of the youth population, of members under 25. So these are just for the under 25 respondents. We asked this question: the ELCA's organizational structure helps to promote racial diversity. The same thing, right? Rank your agreement level for this question. It was actually higher than the initial survey and the Ethnic Association survey with a mean score of 3.70. Obviously, you'd like to see that closer to a 5. So it's still an area for improvement here, but still notable, this is higher than the other surveys. And then finally, we had just three, we had three qualitative components as well. So some key qualitative findings from the youth survey. One question was, what are the most important things about the ELCA that will encourage you to remain in the church in the future? So youth respondents here were asked to identify the most important things that are going to keep them in the church going forward in their lives. And there are some key themes highlighted here in the following slides. So key summary number 1, that the most important aspects of the ELCA that encourage these young people that responded to the survey to remain in the church are its inclusivity, its acceptance of diversity, and affirmation of individuals in the LGBTQ community. And many young respondents here appreciate the welcoming atmosphere, the focus on social justice issues like reproductive rights and racial equality, and efforts to prioritize underrepresented voices. The church's youth programs, campus ministries, and community outreach initiatives are also quite highly valued. A second qualitative summary is that a key factor in encouraging these young folks to remain in the church in the ELCA is the ELCA's emphasis on its Lutheran theological heritage, such as the doctrines of justification by grace through faith and the theology of the cross. So this unique perspective offers meaningful differentiation from other Protestant denominations in that robust theological education, funding for new mission efforts, and prioritizing faith formation across all ages are seen as important for upholding this heritage. So the church's ecumenical outlook, kind people, and stances on justice resonate as well with these young respondents. So again, I think this is important to point out that where these young folks are saying that, yeah, we love the new era, right? We really appreciate that that the ELCA is making efforts to accept folks from the LGBTQ community, that taking these inclusive stances, but also saying that also an important characteristics of the ELCA that's keeping them in the church is that theological heritage. And I think that's important to point out that sometimes when we have these conversations, we think that change means the people referring to abandoning that heritage. That's not what these youth respondents are saying. They're saying that you can have both. That we appreciate the new inclusive stances that we can continue on, but also remaining true to that theological heritage is also important. Finally, a third qualitative finding from the youth survey is that the sense of community, opportunities to get involved, and lively worship with unconventional music, and the church's openness to change are highlighted as strengths by youth respondents. The energy, inclusion of different faiths, and inclusion of pastors of various genders and marital statuses are also appreciated. Many youth respondents feel that the ELCA authentically lives out its values of love, service, and challenging oppressive systems while continually striving to better reflect God's kingdom. All right, that is all the data. That is the initial survey, the ethnic association survey, and the youth survey. You can get my contact information if you have any follow-up questions. You can obviously get follow-up questions from Kristen or TJ, whoever is kind of leading this project, but happy to answer any questions that y'all have. Appreciate it again, the opportunity to work with y'all, and curious to hear more how this goes. Till next time. Thanks, everybody.